All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Mark Solokello. I am the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Kenya, and it's a delight to have you all. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of the Chamber here in Kenya and on behalf of our colleagues at AmChams across the region, I want to warmly welcome you to today's forum on the American AI advantage, powering innovation and economic growth. We are honored to partner with the US Embassy in Nairobi and the US Speakers Program to bring you this important and timely conversation. Shortly, you will be hearing from our speakers, Mark Burrell, who's a regional public engagement specialist, East Africa Public Diplomacy section at the US Embassy in Nairobi, and our keynote speaker, James Gatto, AI leader and partner at Shepherd Malin in Washington, DC. Artificial intelligence is not merely transforming industries, it's fundamentally redefining how economies grow, how they compete, and create meaningful opportunities. The US stands at the forefront of this global AI revolution, leading not only through groundbreaking innovation, but also by championing ethical standards, transparency, and inclusivity that benefit all stakeholders. Kenya and Africa have a fantastic chance to make sure that AI genuinely empowers individuals, boosts competitiveness, and promotes sustainable growth for future generations. Before we get going, I want to just give you a bit of a flavor of what to expect in the next 1.25 hours. After my remarks, which I've already delivered, I will bring on Mark Burrell, who's going to deliver his remarks, and thereafter bring on the keynote presenter, the keynote speaker for today, James Gatto. And thereafter, we will have an opportunity to do a Q&A that I will moderate. And at this point, I'd like to draw your attention to the Q&A tab, the bottom of your screens. We would like you, as the session is proceeding, to submit your questions. Please make them succinct and related to what we are discussing today, and we'll be more than happy to address as many of those as possible when we get to the Q&A segment of our program. Our anticipation is that we will be able to close our session in about 1.25 hours time. So with that said, I'd like to bring on to the screen Mark. Mark, as I've mentioned, we are truly delighted to partner with the US State Department's office, Department of State Office of the US Speaker Programs in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, together with the Public Diplomacy section at the US Embassy here in Nairobi, to bring this important and timely forum. I'm particularly delighted at this point to recognize and welcome Mark Burrell, Regional Public Engagement Specialist at the US Embassy based here in Nairobi. Mark leads the public diplomacy initiatives across East Africa and beyond, including the US speaker programs, making him a really invaluable partner for AmCham as we work to foster and strengthen the US-Kenya trade and investment relations. Mark, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks so much for that warm welcome, Maxwell. It was a really big title for what I actually do. So what I do is I manage the American Spaces within the East Africa region. The American Spaces does a number of things. We do different speaker programs. We do different English language programs. We do talk about exchanges, talk about education pathways to the United States. But one of my favorite things that we do are STEM programs, STEAM programs, if you include the A for arts. It looks like we have a lot of interest here in Kenya. There's about 130 folks online right now. But what's more important is we really have, we're really sort of at an interesting time, I think, in Kenya. We have about 73% of the Kenyan population under 30. So it's a large youth, it's a lot of energy, a lot of folks that are much smarter than me, a lot of folks that are more into tech than me. But a lot of people that I think are looking for ways to build their capacity, develop Kenya, develop the region, develop the world, change the world. And I think AI is one of those things that is really going to help us get there. Last month, ChatGPT, the most users that were using the ChatGPT forum platform were in Kenya. That's globally. It's more than India, more than America, more than a lot of places. That's huge. That's wild. To me, that says people are interested. People want to know what's going on. That 73% of youth are using it. My boomer parents are not using it, right? My older generation relatives aren't using it. It's the youth using it, and they're understanding it. I think this moment in time right now is the same as I like to call it sort of an iPhone moment. It's the same as when we moved from the BlackBerry or the flip phone to the iPhone. It just changed everything. We could have the world at our fingertips, little miniature computers, right? Miniature computers in our hands that can reach out to the world, that can really touch everybody and change things, change how we operate, change how we communicate, change how we research, change what we do. I think that's what I think that's that the iPhone moment right now is what AI, where AI is at right now. And America's leading that forefront, right? We have OpenAI, we have Perplexity, we got Claude, we got Grok, we got all these number of platforms that James is going to talk about here in a minute and sort of discuss. But for the most part, it's American innovation, and we want to put that American innovation in Kenyan hands because Kenyans are the ones that are doing things, right? They're the movers, they're the shakers, they're the people that have the energy, the excitement, the creativity, the vision, right? We want to connect you guys and gals with U.S. innovation such as AI and make it strong and make it understandable and make it a powerful tool in shaping Kenya, shaping the region, shaping the world, shaping futures. So I encourage you all to continue to follow these events with the American Chamber of Commerce, continue to follow these events with the U.S. Embassy. Today, I just wrote a bunch of different proposals that had to deal with hackathons, that had to deal with upcoming hackathons, that had to deal with upcoming tech startup garages, that's talking about doing makerspace stuff, using 3D printers, all this stuff within our American Spaces and U.S. Embassy network, hopefully partnering more and more with AmCham and the other people out there. If you all have an organization that you're smart on this stuff, stay tuned to our social media and website, our U.S. Embassy website, because we're going to start posting some opportunities to partner with folks and really tap into the intelligence and the energy and the creativity in the Kenyan creative economy and really just the Kenyan creative AI sector. Because I want to tap into that. I want to utilize it. I want to hopefully pay for it, right? Nobody should be doing anything for free. But we want to help you get there. We're not gonna make you rich doing it, but we're gonna give you a step up. We're gonna give you hopefully some changes to reach out and build that network, build that capacity, connect with American businesses, connect with American AI, and then hopefully change things and change the world. So I don't want to speak too long, but I encourage you to go to our website, U.S. Embassy Kenya, go and look at our American Spaces. We have 3 American Spaces in Nairobi. We have 1 in Nakuru, 1 in Lamu, 1 in Mombasa, and then we have a bus that's got a 3D printer and Starlink technology and all this other cool tech stuff on there to help coding workshops and help using AI to really break some barriers and really do some cool, exciting things. So with that, I want to turn it over. Thank you so much, Maxwell. Very excited for this. Thank you so much, James, and interesting for your questions. Ask questions in the chat. Ask questions in the Q&A. We're here to interact. It's not a one-way communication. So please hit us with some tough questions. We're ready for you. Thanks so much. I want to turn it back over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for that. I think that's an excellent way of setting the stage. And indeed, as you said, the stats that came out on usage of ChatGPT by Kenyans is completely wild. I just never saw that coming. And I'm still interested in finding out a little more. What are Kenyans actually using ChatGPT for, right? It would be an interesting study to see. Well, I want to switch gears and bring to the screen our keynote speaker for today, James Gatto. But before I do so, I just want to give you a bit of a glimpse of his bio. James is the AI team leader and partner at Shepherd Malin in Washington, D.C. Jim, as he refers to himself, stands as a recognized global leader in artificial intelligence and intellectual property law, co-leading the firm's remarkable 120 plus AI team. I'll say that again, 120 plus person AI team at the firm. With over 35 years of distinguished experience, he provides strategic counsel on the most complex issues emerging at the intersection of technology, innovation, and regulation. Jim is also a prolific author, a blogger, and a speaker on AI legal issues. And beyond that, he is also an adjunct professor at the George Mason Law School, where he teaches emerging legal issues with AI. He has held leadership positions and memberships in AI committees of several leading legal organizations, such as the American Bar Association, the American Intellectual Property Law Association, and the International Technology Law Association. So with that brief intro, I'd like to invite Jim to take on the stage. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Maxwell. Well, I'm honored to be here today to be able to speak with you. I appreciate the efforts of the American Chamber in Kenya, the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, and the Speakers Program for putting this program on and for having me here today to speak with you. I'm going to skip over my background as we've kind of got you got an intro there, but I just kind of highlight. I've been doing AI work for about 25 years. It's been interesting to watch it kind of slowly increase and then rapidly increase with the onset of some of these large language models and generative AI. And it's really those technologies that have kind of catapulted AI into the commercial realm and the rapid growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. What I'm going to cover today really is three high-level points. I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Mark talked about as far as the significance of AI. I'm sure you're all aware of that it is significant, but I'll give you some of my thoughts on ways in which it is. I'm going to talk about America's AI Action Plan, which was recently introduced, which kind of lays out the strategy for America's development of the AI industry, both for America's purposes, but also as part of kind of a global alliance and trying to get AI into the hands of partners who will use it responsibly and share common visions and goals with respect to kind of what that means. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll conclude with some of the opportunities for Kenya as a result of all that. AI is, as Mark said, it's transformative. He likened it to the iPhone. I think that's a good analogy. I think it's even more significant than that. AI is a fundamental technology, in my opinion, that will permeate our personal and professional lives. It will be as transformative as the internet or the iPhone, I think, by a magnitude of 10. It is that powerful. And I'll give you some examples as we go through. The other thing to keep in mind is that AI is really not one thing. A lot of times people talk about AI as if it's kind of a single thing. It really is a set of technologies. And there's there's the data, there's the AI models that are trained, but then there's also different types of models. And so we talk about artificial intelligence generally. there's various iterations of that. There's machine learning, there's neural networks, there's deep learning, and the kind of the deeper you get into that, the more sophisticated that the AI becomes, the more powerful the applications are that leverage those various flavors of AI. Two of the things I want to mention that I don't think get enough attention, but I think are really transformative, are AI agents and agentic AI. Sometimes they're confused, they're slightly different. So AI agents, when we think now as people are using AI, you're familiar with ChatGPT and other tools like that, where you as a user put in a prompt and ask it for some output. And you get pretty amazing results even with where we are today. With AI agents, what will happen is you will have agents that have specific functions that are more kind of narrowly tailored, and you will give them goals or objectives to accomplish on your behalf. And they will create prompts and get outputs, and if you authorize them to take action on your behalf. AI agents are an incredibly powerful tool that are really just becoming, kind of more prevalent and prominent in everyday use right now. And then taking that one step further, agentic AI is really, think about a platform of AI agents. So you can create a more sophisticated platform with more complex goals. And part of what the agentic AI does is it really engages in a kind of a chain of reasoning, as it's called, to figure out for certain goals, what are the various steps that need to be accomplished to achieve those goals. And it identifies those steps, and it breaks the problem down, and then it will identify agents that can perform the different steps, collate the results, and get the end result. Incredibly, it's probably 10 times more powerful than what we're doing today with like ChatGPT and some of the other programs that we interact with directly. The other thing I think it's important to keep in mind is that there's a difference between AI technology and applications of AI. So the models and all of the kind of the back end to the tools that you're seeing are the technology. The applications are really the front end, right? And so chatbots like ChatGPT and others are an example of that, where there's some user interface that sits on top of these models and the other technology that's used to accomplish some results. But we'll see applications across really many different industries. And some of the ones that I note here: agriculture, security, healthcare, education, and public service delivery are ones where we're seeing a lot of activity. And I know those are all part of the areas of focus in Kenya's AI strategy. So I think there's great opportunities in each of those areas, as well as really every other industry. If you think about how the internet, there's very few, if any, industries that haven't been touched by the internet. AI is going to be as significant, but potentially even more so. I hate quoting statistics or numbers because they're never right. But I think directionally it's important to realize that whatever particular numbers you put on this, most of the analysts that cover this space believe that between now and 2030, the global AI market will be in the trillions of dollars. Whether it's 1 trillion or 3 trillion, you could look at different reports and get different numbers. But I think it's really the magnitude that's important. I think everyone agrees this is a really, really huge opportunity worldwide. And I think that it's one where the Kenya and other countries in emerging markets have a huge opportunity to grab a piece of it, because it's really in its infancy. The other thing I will mention is that from the significance of AI is it is really going to change our society in many ways. One of which will be AI will for sure displace many existing jobs. Every time we have a significant technological revolution, that happens. And in the short term, it is very disruptive for people who are losing their jobs as a result of this. But historically, these technical revolutions have always created an opportunity for new and even better jobs. It takes a while to get people trained to do that. One quick example I want to focus on: computer science, computer programming. If you asked 5 years ago, if you asked someone what's one of the best fields that young students could go into to get a good job, people would say computer programming. It'd always be one of the top 5 answers. If you look at the top tech companies in the US right now, they're laying off programmers. AI code generators, which are AI tools that actually write software, are being used at a blazing pace. And companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and others are estimating that 70 to 80% of the code that's written for them over the next several years will be written by AI instead of humans. There'll still be a need for humans, but it's going to be much less than the army of programmers that are used today. So I'll get to this later on. So education of, I know there's a very vibrant and enthusiastic, youthful group of people who want to get into the tech space in Kenya. I think it's important to focus on where you get in light of these significant changes. When we talk about AI, people talk about, there's good and bad that comes with it, just like any other technology. In my view, AI itself is neither good nor bad, but really it's the applications of it that can produce good or bad results. And if we look at a couple of just simple examples, like autonomous vehicles with self-driving cars, if they're done safely, that's a good use. If people use AI for lethal autonomous weapons, that's a bad use. Drug discovery, the healthcare industry and researchers are using AI to find new drug candidates. That's obviously a good use. We're seeing others talk about using AI to develop bioweapons and other things that could be harmful to society, a bad use. Same with facial scanning. It is an area where I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but facial scanning can be very significant in providing secure access, whether it's to your iPhone or buildings or other things. But we're also seeing in some countries they're using it as the government is using it as a surveillance tool, and potentially impacting the civil liberties and rights of their citizens. And with generative AI, the ability to have all this creative content is great, but we also see the risk, and we've already experienced many examples of deep fakes where AI creates things that look realistic, but are portraying people who look real, like a real person, saying something that's not coming from them. And it's been used in elections and in other areas. So there's a lot of issues to think about. When we think about bad AI, it can be unintentional, which comes from a lack of knowledge or poorly designed AI, or it can be intentional by bad actors. And so part of what we trying to do with policy and regulation is to take care of that first issue, to make sure that AI is developed responsibly and in accordance with ways that will be safe, and try to keep AI, bad actors from using AI and from getting access to some of the most sophisticated AI to do bad things. And on the flip side, good AI, it doesn't happen by accident. You really need, as companies are developing AI, they need to develop an understanding of the issues and what can go wrong, and factor that in when they design their AI, not build it and then test it to see if it's safe. It has to be done at the beginning. And this requires more than just complying with the legal guidelines. It really requires getting into principles of what's referred to as responsible AI, which I'll talk about, and ethical AI principles as well. So on the legal and regulatory policy side, the goal is to try to strike a balance. You need to maximize and mandate the good AI and prevent the bad AI. But as part of this, it's really important to enable this technology to flourish. It's important, in my view, and I think the goals of the AI Action Plan for the US is not to overregulate the technology to the point that it impedes the technical progress. If you look at the EU AI Act, it's very comprehensive, but we're seeing a lot of reluctance of people to develop AI in Europe because it's a very onerous set of regulations to deal with. And so while it may be safe, it may not maximize the opportunities. And so I'm not saying that to be critical of the EU. I'm just saying that it's an example of where I think finding the right balance is really, really important. And what we're seeing across the world right now, is that the law and policy varies greatly by country. And so this also creates difficulties for many companies who want to use their or deploy their AI globally. If you have the country by country regulation, it's difficult from a compliance perspective and costly to the extent you can do it. So with that as just kind of a backdrop, as many of you may be aware, in just July of this year, the White House issued what's called the America's AI Action Plan. And I'm going to go through what some of that covers. But and some of the principles that are set forth in the action plan include the following: is that there really is a global race right now by a number of major countries to be the dominant players in AI. And I think the premise is that whoever has the largest AI ecosystem will be in the best position to shape global AI standards. And it will benefit that country, but it will also benefit the other countries that leverage that technology. And to the extent there's kind of harmony, it will make it easier for AI technology to be exported to countries that adopt these standards. And so, there's a need to build vast AI infrastructure and the energy to power it in the U.S. That's really a problem right now for us, is getting enough energy to really power the energy-intensive AI applications. And I think it was mentioned in the introduction, AI has been America has been a leader in technology from semiconductors, from Intel, from the early days of semiconductor through NVIDIA as being really kind of the top designer and developer of AI chips. The models, a lot of the big LLMs are being developed in the US, as well as a lot of the applications. And their goal of the plan is to try to continue to have America lead and be the gold standard for AI worldwide, both for our benefit, but also to ensure that our allies and friends in other countries are building on American technology for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So there's really three pillars to the AI action plan. One is to accelerate innovation. The second is to build out American AI infrastructure. And the third is to take a leading role in international diplomacy and security in connection with AI. So with respect to the first pillar, accelerating innovation, there's a number of components to that. We talked about trying to have the best technology and leading in developing these applications. And the premise of the plan is that to achieve these goals, it will be beneficial for the government to create conditions where the private sector-led innovation can flourish. So this is not about the government really trying to take over control, but rather to provide the resources that private industry needs to accomplish these objectives. So the way it plans to do it is the first component deals with regulation. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the goals is to remove unnecessary regulation or red tape to make it easier for this technology to be developed. But this is not to say that regulation is going out the door. There's still going to be regulation in areas where it's needed to make sure AI is safe and responsible, but really it's more about striking a balance, as I alluded to earlier. It's important to America and American values that the AI protect free speech. We've seen for years with social media, some of the social media companies skewing ideological positions based on what is presented or shown to certain users, suppressing certain posts that cover certain topics, and that whole concept of not really facilitating free speech is antithetical to the goals here. So with AI, one of the goals of what the plan talks about is ensuring that there's free speech for people that are using AI. There's an encouragement to use open source and so-called open weight AI. So this is analogous to open source software, but what's beneficial here is that if we export open source AI, it will enable partners in other countries or other regions to leverage the technology and modify it, customize it for their particular uses. The underlying technology developed in America and customize it for their purposes. From the standpoint of enabling AI adoption, many companies and certain regulated industries show a hesitancy for some companies to really adopt AI as much as they could right now. And part of the goal is to open those barriers and create the regulatory clarity and to facilitate education and principles for safe adoption by companies in these industries. And the empowerment of AI workers. You mentioned a lot of re-education will be needed in light of the changing jobs. And there's also an effort to support AI in connection with manufacturing. As many of you are aware, America over the last couple of decades has really outsourced a lot of its manufacturing. We've become much more of a service economy. There's a goal in light of AI to try to bring some of the manufacturing back to the US. And part of it is that there's multiple reasons. One of it has to do with, particularly with AI, the security aspects of it. If there's components that are outsourced, like with the chips that are being manufactured elsewhere, there have been examples of situations where there's security concerns that kind of leak into the process. I won't go through all these in great detail, but here are some of the other kind of components of what the plan talks about to accelerate innovation. There's going to be a strong investment in AI-enabled science for drug discovery and other beneficial purposes. It's really important to develop really top-notch scientific data sets to accomplish that. As I mentioned earlier, really one of the things that really drives AI, and the reason that AI has become so prolific recently, is we have massive amounts of data. Most of these LLMs that are used now are trained on virtually the internet, which is a tremendous amount of data. Some of it's good, some of it's not good. It's not all curated, but there's a lot of information there. For scientific studies, it's more important to have curated data sets, and that's a big part of the goal. And then I'll just touch on a couple of these. There's also a significant push to use AI within the government and Department of Defense in safe and responsible ways, to leverage the advantages of those technologies, both for the efficiency of government delivery of public service and for defense applications as well. So on the data side, I just want to touch on this again. I alluded to the importance of data, but I want to just highlight a couple of things as well. Data is really one of the most important things with AI. And as I mentioned, having quality data is really important. Other countries are building national databases as well, and some of it is good and some of it has some issues with it. One of the things that we've seen with data is that if you're just the companies that are just kind of sucking data off the internet, there's a lot of individual information there, personally identifiable information, facial pictures of people and other things. And this is creating issues with respect to civil liberties and privacy and confidentiality. There's two books here that if you're interested in this, I strongly recommend reading. The first one, Your Face Belongs to Us, really talks about facial recognition, and it chronicles the history of Clearview, which is a company that has leveraged facial recognition. And it talks about some of the good and the bad and what can go wrong with AI from a facial recognition perspective. And Unmasking AI is a great book written by Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who discovered that when she was trying to build an AI tool it was basically like a mirror that did facial recognition, because her face was black, the tool wouldn't recognize her. And that's because the tool had been trained primarily on white faces. And so she set off on a crusade to really deal with some of these issues. And this gets into some of the issues where some of the shortcomings of AI have existed. And she's done phenomenal work. I strongly encourage that if you're interested in more information there. And we talked earlier about deepfake. So as I mentioned, the goal of deregulating AI doesn't mean there's no regulation. Recently, there was a law signed in the US called the Take It Down Act, which specifically addresses deepfakes. Both in many cases, there's sexually explicit deepfakes, there's non-consensual deepfakes, and there's also other forms. And so there are laws that are being used to address that. The second pillar is building out AI infrastructure in the US. And there's really, just to kind of summarize what's here, there's data centers to manage all of this data are needed. We're building them out like crazy, but the power and the energy infrastructure needed to power them is an area that we still need to focus on. And security is a huge issue. So those are some of the main areas of focus. We're also, they mentioned there's a significant amount of investment going into training the workforce to deal with AI infrastructure. A lot of these jobs are new jobs, but there's significant investment going into that area to enable the workforce to keep up with the new demands. And cybersecurity is just a significant issue. We're seeing, issues where there's potential vulnerabilities in power grids and other aspects of critical infrastructure. All of that is being addressed under the infrastructure component. The third pillar really, I think, is of most importance today. The rest of what I've talked about is kind of background. But the goal of America leading in this AI revolution is not just for the benefit of America, as I mentioned. It's really to enable America to provide safe, secure AI technology, to enable partners who want to leverage it and use it in a responsible way, and partners who share similar goals with respect to responsible and ethical use of AI to benefit from that. And so, there is a strong desire to export American technology and to develop global alliances to keep the good people using it and try to prevent the people who want to use it for bad purposes from getting access to it. And so as part of this, there's a goal to really export the entire AI tech stack through partnerships, including the hardware, the models, all the software, the applications, and everything else that goes with it, to our partners in other countries. And so I think this is where there's a huge opportunity. I know Kenya already has partnerships with some of the big American AI companies. I think there's opportunity for even more going forward, and it's not just the big companies. I think what we're seeing as far as adoption of AI, everyone is focused on the chatbots and the LLMs, and those are very significant. But they're trained on a lot of data, but they're not specific to any industry or problem or application. And what we're seeing is more and more companies either using these LLMs and then fine-tuning them or customizing them through other types of training to solve particular problems, whether it's localized problems from a geographic perspective or industry-specific problems. And so there's a need to take this core technology and really build out the refinements to enable it to be much more application specific. And I think that's one of the areas where there's opportunities for Kenya. We've seen there's a lot of international bodies focused on AI, and to a certain extent that's good. There's a perception on the part of some that certain countries are trying to influence the standards that go into these agreements for their own purpose, and maybe not for the benefit of the world. I won't go into too much detail on that. Many of these large organizations, they're slow, they're cumbersome, and it's really hard to reach agreement given the differing views of some of the powerful members that are part of these organizations. So while the U.S. still supports these organizations and will participate, a lot of what they want to do is direct partnerships in developing the global alliance that I talked about with countries that are like-minded and are willing to work with us on the goals and objectives, that we have for safe, responsible AI. And as another part of the international issue is that, and you may have seen this in the news, is that there's a lot of issues with respect to export control enforcement by the U.S. Many of these chips are very powerful. We've had some limitations on under our export control regs. These chips can't be shipped to. We've seen some circumvention of that, and a goal is to kind of close those loopholes and prevent any of the circumvention that's going on by any bad actors. The security I mentioned is a big issue. So, developing standards, the U.S. government is very focused on developing standards to evaluate the security of these models and how to protect them from bad actors. We've seen situations, and like maybe you may have heard of DeepSeek. There's a lot of belief that while they've developed these models that are very allegedly cheap to develop, there appears to be evidence that a lot of these models were developed by using what's called distillation, which is in a simple terms, almost like a way of reverse engineering some of these large language models to get the benefit of them. And so things like that, and trying to tighten the security around the ability to access and penetrate these models to kind of do this reverse engineering is also being scrutinized. And then the biosecurity is a big issue. There's a lot of potential issues with use of AI in ways that could be harmful to people. And so again, as another aspect of security, that's an area of focus. So just briefly, I'm going to conclude here in a minute so we can get to questions. But so beyond the action plan, people say, so when you talk about responsible AI, what are we really talking about? I'm going to just cover at a high level that one of the most important set of documents, in my opinion, to look at if you really want to understand better responsible AI is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, published what's referred to as an AI risk management framework. And as you can see here, it kind of maps out the different types of harms that can exist, both harms to people, harms to organizations, harms to ecosystems. And it analyzes these harms and looks at the elements of what needs to go into the design of AI, including all of these components here, to really have trustworthy AI systems. So this is kind of the pillars or the bedrock upon which AI should be designed in connection with any applications that are being developed. And so just in concluding here, when I look at the AI action plan and a lot of the goals that are stated in it, and I look at Kenya's AI strategy, the various pillars and the enablers within those pillars that are set forth in Kenya's AI strategy, I think align very well with what's in the American AI action plan. And so I think some of the opportunities for Kenya are obviously to expand on some of the partnerships it has with big US tech companies, but not just big companies. I think there's going to be specialty opportunities, industry-specific companies where there's going to be opportunities as well. Obviously, I think given the alignment of Kenya's goals and that of the US, I think that it's likely that the US will be very interested in leveraging, or Kenya can leverage the export of US tech under the Global Alliance structures we talked about earlier. I think that a unique opportunity for Kenya, as I mentioned, is that many of the LLMs are trained on very general information, but when it comes to serving particular countries or regions, or where there's unique languages, unique culture, there's not a lot of in-depth data there. And so I think Kenya has an opportunity to capitalize on the unique and localized data that it has to build applications that are specific to Kenya and the greater Africa. And obviously, training the workforce is really important. There's a lot of, I think, training materials that are available through the US and training programs but I think this is kind of a critical component as well. So with that, let me kind of pause and we will jump into questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jim, for that. I think you've covered quite a bit of ground there and really dug into the core of what we wanted to project today. We have questions coming through in the Q&A, and I want to encourage our audience to keep submitting questions. We'll get to those shortly, but I want to get this going, Jim, by asking two questions of my own. The first one is right at the heart of what you do as an IP lawyer. And the question is relating to IP and copyright, and this concern that is there from, you know, the likes of media, the likes of content creators, academia, that AI is basically scruffing their IP, right? And presenting that as its own. And how do you then protect IP owners? How do you make sure that it doesn't infringe on copyright and so on? And then we're starting to see, I'm sure, certainly in the US, lawsuits aimed at these tech companies that are coming up with your large language models and so on. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. That's one. And then the second question is on context-aware AI, which is where you landed when saying that Kenya has a unique opportunity with data that is actually localized. Is there a world where you see what I would refer to as AI for Africa? Let's get going with those two, and then we take it on from there.
Two great questions. So on the first issue with respect to protection of copyright and other IP, there are several dozen lawsuits currently pending in the US on that very issue. And more precisely what the issue is that many of these large language model tools have been trained on copyrighted content that they've scraped off the internet. And the law in the US currently is that presumptively, if you make a copy of copyrighted work without permission, it is an infringement. However, there's also a defense, which is referred to as fair use. And so the big question in connection, or one of the big questions in connection with the IP is it a fair use to scrape content and use copyrighted content to train AI models, or is it infringement? There's been some preliminary decisions, and the decisions have been mixed. My view is we're not going to have a black and white rule on this. It's going to be fact specific, based on there's 4 factors in the fair use test. I won't go through all of it, but the two most important things of that test are, one is, are you using the content for a transformative purpose? Or are you, if you were to take AI and take let's say a book and just create a new version of the book, that's pretty much going to be copyright infringement because it's not a transformative purpose. You're starting with a book, you're ending with a book. But if you're using AI to create a tool that can create different content from the book, then it's a closer question. And that's really the heart of what's being addressed in some of these litigations. So the short of it is, we have worked with a number of companies that have very valuable content to actually license their content for a significant amount of money to some of these tool companies. And it does 2 things. One, it generates revenue for the copyright owners. But second, you can put parameters on, you can negotiate parameters on how that information of yours will be used. So that's one way to do it. If you don't want to license, it's challenging right now. I think there's until these cases get resolved and there's more clarity on whether and when there's fair use or infringement, I think it continues to be a bit of a challenge. There's technical means you can use to prevent your data from being scraped to a certain extent. They're not 100% effective, but that's part of what can be done in the interim. So it's a kind of a complex, great question. I know it's not a definitive answer, but the state of the law is a bit in flux right now. And so There are things we can do to protect, and we can do the licensing, but some of it's we'll see how it kind of plays out. On the second question, yeah, I do think there's huge opportunities. I think where AI is going is we're going to see more and more specialty applications, whether it's for a particular purpose or a particular region, or a particular group of people. And so I do think whether it's context aware or however you want to define it, the ability to kind of create more customized models and to use AI in a more targeted, specific way is going to be a huge opportunity for growth. And what we're seeing with the chatbots is important, but I think that's where the long tail is in this technology space.
Excellent. Well, let's jump into the questions from the audience, and we'll try and get us to go through as many of these as we can. There's a very targeted question here. I think this must have come from the statement, which we all aware of the risk to jobs, and especially your entry-level coding type jobs, right? So the person is asking, does this mean that the youth in schools and colleges should stop focusing on coding courses or boot camps? Where then should they shift their focus on? So that's one question. And I think the next question is also related in some ways to that, where Clifford is asking, is there a way that AI can give an independent opinion, right? So if you take the example of auditors or judges based on information provided, and is there any possibility at some point in the future that we could get to that? So it's still pointing to how AI could easily replace jobs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so on the first, I wouldn't say that students shouldn't study coding. I think coding is still good. Understanding coding and being able to do coding is still going to be important. I just think that it should be part of a broader education around AI technology if you really want to maximize your opportunities for jobs in the space. And on the second question, there's a number of ways to answer this. And can AI give opinions? Yes. Should it give opinions? I think in many cases not. And this gets to really one of the fundamental aspects of using AI, and that is the so-called human in the loop. It's fine for an auditor to use AI to assist the auditor in developing an opinion, but I wouldn't rely on AI to give an opinion. Same thing with legal work, right? There's already been cases where there was someone developed a tool that was giving AI tool to give legal responses to someone, and there's laws against unauthorized practice of law, and some of those tools probably violate that. But whether it's legal or not legal, when you think about whether it's licensed professionals or really other professionals where what you're providing is services and is opinions or advice based on years of knowledge, AI is not quite there yet. It can help you and it can get some really good information, but I think for anything that's meaningful, it's absolutely critical to have a human review what's being produced by AI, but certainly use it where it's helpful. But I don't think that it's anywhere near ready, and I think it's going to be quite a while before we can just say we're going to use this to do a judicial decision or to do an audit.
Yeah, I think that's comforting, Jim. The concern, I think, is actually one that is valid, and especially if you take it into even more sensitive areas like health, right?
Mm-hmm.
With medical diagnostics, and we know there are already applications that try to advance that, try to accelerate medical diagnostic. And I think it's a great thing on the one hand, but it does come with that risk. And people just want a little bit of comfort.
Yeah, and one more thing, if I may, on that, just a recent story that was prevalent here in the U.S. There was a teenager that was using, I believe it was ChatGPT, like as a therapist, and it was really giving the person bad advice, and it was a bad result. And part of that is, I think there's two parts to the issue there. One is these tools, I think, should, as part of a responsible design, put in filters or other technological measures to limit or prevent the types of questions it can answer. And it should not be giving answers to questions like that. And the other thing is, anyone using AI needs to understand that AI is powerful, but it's not the answer to everything. And so for things like mental health questions, it's fine to do research and I try to draw a distinction between getting medical information versus medical advice, right? So getting information is fine for AI, but to rely on it for advice, I think, is very risky from a user perspective as well.
Absolutely. There's a question from Michael, who's asking a question related to AI infrastructure and seeing that the bulk of critical parts of the infrastructure are built on technology tied to certain companies. And this question is, what can we do to reduce dependence on those companies? And do you see an opportunity for emerging economies like Kenya having more say or partnership with the US in a manner that makes them stakeholders as opposed to just mere consumers? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so again, another great question. I think, with respect to some of the fundamental technology like the chips and some of the LLMs and things like that, these companies are investing tens of billions of dollars. I think it's very hard to compete with that. It's not just a matter of the money. They have some of the top talent and all of that. So to the extent that there's a desire on the part of any groups, whether it's countries or other companies, to compete, it's very difficult. And so I wouldn't say it can't be done. It's just it's a very tall order. And so, if you want to compete, it's just going to take a lot to get there. But I do think as part of the action plan, that one of the premises of trying to encourage open source AI is to facilitate the sharing of this information so that others can focus on customizing, using the key technology to customize and build applications that are, let's say, specific to Kenya or specific to a particular industry, so that we don't have a lot of people reinventing the wheel. It does create a dependence. I recognize that. And so if that's a problem, then the solution is to come up with a lot of money and expertise to be able to compete with it. But that's very hard at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And we are seeing the valuation of these companies just skyrocketing. It's completely unbelievable. And there's talk of a potential bubble busting soon. What's your view on that?
Well, without giving financial advice, I think that I don't think we're going to see a bubble like we saw with the internet. And I think there's a big reason, the big difference for that. In the early days of the internet, everything ran up and then it was a bubble. The difference there was that everyone you had companies with no revenue trying to find customers and spending a lot of money to find customers. Given that we have the internet, everything's all built out, ChatGPT had the fastest rate of growth to 100 million users of any technology. It is much easier for these companies to get it, to get users. And so the investment, a lot of the investment is going into the technology, not advertising, right? Like it was in the internet. And there is revenue from day one. Look, there'll be ups and downs. It will not be a straight line up. But in my opinion, we're still in the first inning of a really, really long game. And will there be some pullbacks here and there? I believe so. But I think that the longer term trend is clearly up.
Yeah. Let's talk about energy and the energy demands that AI technology and infrastructure requires. A question here from Kidist, who's asking, how will African countries be able to reconcile their energy needs for electrifying the continent, especially for critical sectors, so that those sectors can actually take off, can develop? And on the other hand, this ambition and wish to use AI technologies that we also know are really hungry, have a big appetite for energy. So think data centers and so on that's already being set up. What is there some balance there that needs to be struck in your view?
Yeah, so I will say I am not the energy expert, but I will say my view is this. I think that it's a huge problem even for the US. We don't have enough energy. And so I don't have an easy solution to it. We need to look at various forms of energy, whether it's solar or otherwise, where it may be more effective to build certain technologies in different countries or to leverage them there because of available energy sources is part of it. The second thing is, again, in my view, not every AI application down the road is going to require an LLM. And I think trying to find these smaller models that can be very efficient is one way to. It doesn't solve the energy problem, but it avoids it to a certain extent. So, like Apple, for example, like while they really haven't nailed their AI strategy yet, they're trying to build AI that can be done on a phone. And obviously, you can't run LLMs on a phone, but if you can leverage um, you know, smaller scale models, right? If just like, let's say for a personal assistant for a second, you can probably get away with a lot less than having an LLM. And so I think part of the solution will be, coming up with more tailored AI applications that aren't as energy hungry. Some of them are going to be energy hungry, and it's a big problem. I don't have the solution to that, but it's definitely there needs to be a balance between how much energy these consume versus how much energy there is to power them and all the other energy needs that are existing.
Yeah, yeah. Small businesses and the ability to leverage AI and both at an enterprise level and in other applications as well when you're thinking business development and so on. Do you think or do you see some potential use cases, perhaps some that are already even being applied in the US context that you could share?
Yeah, so I do think that AI is a great equalizer. I think, if you look at, let's say like research firms, for example, right, like investment research firms, it used to be that companies needed a lot of analysts to cover a lot of information because there was a lot of work to do. You can get a lot of that information now through AI. And so you don't need to have a team of people doing it. So in certain areas where the difference between a big company and a small company is largely the number of people and what they're doing. If AI can perform that function, you don't need all those people. And so small companies can get that benefit. But that's one area that kind of comes to mind. There's many others like that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Just trying to go through this real quick. I know we are running out of time as well.
Yeah.
So make sure that we've covered the key ones. Perhaps I can take this question here. The disruption from a market perspective, and maybe you touched on this, James, seeing that as a thread coming through around skills, right? Are there certain skills that as a country we need to start thinking about seriously if you're to project that future? What AI is doing in terms of disruption? Are there certain skills that we need to think more about?
Well, I think there are, and I think they're at various levels. So I think from the standpoint of, one of the things getting a lot of attention now is training people to use AI more effectively, and the so-called prompt engineering, right? If you put a simple query into ChatGPT, whatever, you're going to get an output. But if you put in a more complex query with the right parameters and details, and you can do what's called temperature and different things to customize the output, you'll get a much better result. So that's a simple example, but from a use case perspective, it can make a significant difference in how effective the output of the AI is. So that's on the use side. I think from the standpoint of building applications, and I mentioned AI agents and agentic AI, like I think it's important. They're very powerful tools, but they need to be, when you design them, to have goals and objectives. It's very easy to say, but it really needs to be thought out. So I think there's going to be a whole industry around designing AI agents and agentic AI platforms. And then I think there's the customization, as we talked about earlier. I think there is a huge opportunity. How do you work with, take existing LLMs or existing technology and customize it? And there's tools like fine tuning and other things that people are aware of right now, but there's a lot more that can be done with respect to combining AI with other technologies, for example. And so the engineering around the core technology to build useful applications that may be more energy efficient or produce results that others aren't able to get right now, that's another, I think, whole area that has great opportunities. So those are just a few.
All right, that's great. That's great, Jim. From a policy or regulatory perspective, you at our AI strategy, we are currently in the process of developing an AI policy, and of course the guidelines and regulations that will support that. Any just high-level considerations that you think we should take as a country in this process of developing a policy that I want to imagine should be progressive, as you say earlier on, that would actually encourage growth? Are there some nuggets that you can share that would really help support that?
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of hard to be too specific, but what I would say is a couple of things. One is I really do think it's important to really understand the good and the bad of, or the potential good and bad of AI, and what the problems can be, to be able to develop effective policy. I think it's important to obviously avoid or prevent the bad, but then it's also, I think, really important to not have it overly regulated to the point where it's too hard to build something because it's too regulatorily complex or too costly to deal with. So I think that overriding principle is really important. I think one of the things that I think has been done pretty well in the US is, you mentioned on the copyright issue, which is a very, very difficult issue. The US Copyright Office and the Patent Office, similarly on some of the patent issues, held a series of public hearings. And they invited experts and in some cases just people from industry who had issues or concerns they wanted to raise, to get this, all of the voices that wanted to be heard. And in the US, there was over 10,000 written comments on what the policy should be. But to the very prescient question you asked about, is it copying infringement or is it fair use? And I actually spoke at those hearings that they had with a number of other kind of experts. And so I think the point is, in order, and this is no way a slight to policy makers, there's a lot to know. And some of it is theoretical, but the people that are on the ground actually trying to apply AI or who are being impacted by AI, hearing their stories and having them come forth can really help shape where's that fine line and the balance in let's regulate but not over-regulate. And so I think those are really more tactics as opposed to specifics of what should be included. But I think those are probably two of the most important things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for what has been a very, very edifying and insightful session. I mean, your expertise and your longevity and experience in this space is clearly evident. And I believe our members and then the various guests that we had in today's forum have taken away value. So with that, I'd like to bring the session to a close. And once again, thank you, and thank the US Embassy here in Kenya, together with the US Speakers Program, their partnership for this particular webinar. With that, I want to bring this session to a close. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Jim, have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you.